not all those who wander are lost, as the familiar saying reminds us. When we encounter the word labyrinth, visions of impenetrable darkness, deep isolation, and baffling networks of inescapable corridors immediately flood our minds. Yet, we must ask ourselves if this mental picture is actually accurate, especially since modern society erroneously treats the concept as a direct equivalent to a mere maze. In reality, the profound initial significance of this ancient motif has undergone a complete transformation, a fitting historical fate for such an enigmatic and complex design. Serving as a fundamental psychological archetype, this primordial image stands as one of our most ancient cultural symbols, with origins stretching all the way back to the Bronze Age, spanning roughly from 2500 to 2000 before Christ. We uncover the earliest iterations of these patterns carved into prehistoric rocks, primarily scattered across the European continent. Throughout the Spanish region of Galicia, for instance, numerous intricate designs emerge alongside depictions of wild game like deer, hinting that they may have functioned as mystical charms to ensure a successful hunt. Similarly, within Castilla y León, observers can examine a pair of massive boulders, each adorned with three peculiar and captivating variations of this geometric figure. Moving to Nacquan, Italy, researchers have discovered an Iron Age engraving featuring the intricate winding motif surrounded by a multitude of armed warriors. Furthermore, its placement within a burial site at the tomb of Sardinia implies a strong connection to concepts of spiritual rebirth or existence beyond death, while an etching from the Camonica Valley showcases an individual holding their arms skyward in solemn prayer. While these historic engravings act as the foundational prototypes, we also encounter physical iterations built entirely from clustered stones and boulders throughout Russia and the Nordic countries, with the majority of these masonry structures tracing their creation to the late Middle Ages, anywhere from Anno Domini 1300 to 1500. In our modern era, this enduring structure permeates every aspect of society, making frequent appearances in contemporary architecture, fine art, literature, cinema, and interactive media. At its core, this archetypal figure beautifully illustrates the human journey through life, complete with shadowy corners and unforeseeable deviations. Navigating these challenges successfully leads to profound enlightenment and personal transformation, whereas succumbing to them plunges us into disorientation, leaving existence feeling absurdly bleak and Kafkaesque. This perpetual struggle perfectly mirrors our eternal, intrinsic quest for true self-actualization. Within the spiritual cosmology of the Native American O'odham tribe, their divine creator, I'itoi, is famously illustrated as the iconic man in the maze. Utilizing mystical abilities to access this sanctuary, the deity utilizes the twisting paths to shield himself from adversaries, yet remains completely capable of emerging whenever his followers require desperate assistance. Here, the sprawling network symbolizes the winding progression of life itself, where arriving at the central point allows us to reflect deeply upon our previous journey. At this climactic moment, the sun god descends to offer you a sacred blessing and confirm your success, signifying both the completion of your earthly passage and your ultimate transition into the afterlife. Although the perspective from deep inside the winding corridors feels intensely claustrophobic and chaotic, a bird's-eye view reveals a magnificent tapestry of supreme artistry and deliberate organization. Ultimately, the structure exists as a paradox that masterfully intertwines profound harmony with utter disorder, creating a dichotomy that has fueled centuries of persistent misunderstanding. Most people readily connect this concept with the Minoan civilization, an influential Bronze Age society located on the Greek island of Crete. This quintessential archetypal blueprint, frequently designated as the Cretan Labyrinth, features exactly one continuous route that spirals rhythmically to generate 7 distinct circuits. We possess the oldest surviving artifact of this specific design on an inscribed clay tablet recovered from the Mycenaean palace at Pylos in southern Greece. This invaluable relic survived solely because a catastrophic blaze baked and hardened the clay around 1200 before Christ. The reverse side of this ancient record commands the offering of 1 jar of honey to all the gods, 1 jar of honey to the mistress of the Labyrinth, which likely serves as a reference to the mythological figure Ariadne. Identical seven-circled motifs famously decorate the ancient currency minted in Knossos, serving as a reminder that our modern terminology stems directly from the ancient Greek word labyrinthos. Interestingly, the initial historical application of this vocabulary actually described a colossal architectural marvel situated in Egypt. Writing in the 5th century before Christ, the Greek historian Herodotus chronicled his visit to this monumental site, boldly asserting that its grandeur eclipsed even the legendary pyramids. He utilized the term almost generically to portray an overwhelmingly massive, expertly engineered sanctuary constructed entirely from stone. Celebrated as one of the ancient wonders of the world, the Labyrinth of Egypt functioned as a sprawling mortuary temple positioned adjacent to the pyramid of the pharaoh Amenemhet III, whose reign occurred roughly 1800 before Christ. Subsequent generations of scholars eventually drew parallels between this sprawling Egyptian complex and the traditional winding motif, recognizing it as a primitive ancestor to the puzzles we know today. During the 1st century before Christ, the historian Diodorus of Sicily noted that individuals venturing inside the structure struggled immensely to navigate their way back out. A century later, Pliny the Elder described it as a bewildering network of corridors, arguing that the famed Cretan version was merely a replica scaled down to be 100 times smaller. Consequently, this marked the initial moment in history where the sacred geometry was equated with intentionally confusing networks of dead ends. These subsequent literary accounts were not based on first-hand exploration, but rather illustrated the evolving cultural associations attaching themselves to the core concept. Even earlier, around 400 before Christ, Plato's dialogue, Euthydemus, utilized the winding structure as a straightforward metaphor, describing a situation where characters believed they had reached their destination, only to find themselves deposited right back at the starting line, forced to resume their arduous search. Plato's analogy perfectly captures the experience of traversing a classical, unicursal design, which possesses only a single continuous track that ensures constant forward momentum, despite utilizing highly convoluted and circuitous routing. You simply cannot make a wrong turn within this framework. By merely continuing along the designated track, you are absolutely guaranteed to arrive at the center. This unbroken, singular path represents the true, authentic manifestation of the symbol originating in the Bronze Age. Conversely, multicursal mazes featuring numerous branching options and frustrating dead ends were not invented until the latter stages of the medieval period. These deceptive networks are designed specifically to induce disorientation and the fear of wandering aimlessly, drawing their English name from the Old English word mass, meaning bewilderment, which itself traces back to the Old Norse massa, the very linguistic root that birthed our modern concept of amazement. Initial historical evidence suggests that the earliest labyrinthine layouts functioned primarily as martial fortifications, designed to repel invaders. This defensive concept mirrors the chakra vyuha, or wheel formation, famously depicted in the ancient Hindu epic known as the Mahabharata. Within this vast literary work, the formation consists of 7 concentric rings of infantrymen, rotating in alternating directions to confound and ensnare adversaries inside a lethal, grinding mechanism. While regular troops populate the outermost perimeters, seasoned veterans guard the interior rings, leaving the supreme commander stationed safely at the core of this simultaneously protective and aggressive structure. During the climactic conflict of the epic, a young warrior named Abhimanyu, the son of Arjuna, managed to breach this formidable tactical arrangement. Yet, he lacked the knowledge to secure his escape. Even though he fought valiantly and successfully penetrated the innermost sector, opposing forces eventually surrounded and destroyed him from every conceivable angle. His tragic demise serves as a profound metaphysical warning that you should never undertake a profound initiation trial before acquiring the necessary psychological and physical preparation. Fundamentally, labyrinths represent cosmic order, whereas mazes embody pure chaos, rendering these two structural concepts absolute ideological opposites. Navigating a traditional labyrinth offers a completely predictable experience, with a singular, unalterable path from the entrance to the center, thoroughly eliminating any chance of losing your bearing. Conversely, a maze actively tests its occupant by presenting numerous intersecting routes, forging a deeply confusing environment that instills a modern feeling of inescapable entrapment. We see this contemporary cultural anxiety perfectly illustrated in the immensely popular 2009 dystopian narrative, The Maze Runner, where an amnesiac youth must flee a colossal, ivy-drenched stone prison. Filled with lightless passages, abrupt terminations, and lethal beasts, the enclosure shifts its architecture nightly, manifesting the eternal human dread of losing our way completely. In his seminal text, The Concept of Anxiety, the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard defines existential dread as the inevitable vertigo that accompanies absolute freedom. He illustrates this psychological state by describing an individual peering over a precipice into a vast chasm, suddenly overwhelmed by the horrifying realization that they could voluntarily cast themselves downward. The broader the scope of your personal liberty, the more intensely you will be gripped by this paralyzing apprehension. As Friedrich Nietzsche famously observed, peering deeply into the void inevitably prompts the void to peer directly back into your soul. Rather than fearing concrete dangers, this profound psychological disorientation stems from the overwhelming burden of selecting a single trajectory from an ocean of boundless alternatives. According to Kierkegaard, we risk devastating ourselves, either by indulging obsessively in fleeting mundane pleasures or by fleeing into abstract spiritual realms while abandoning our vital terrestrial obligations. Because humanity embodies a fragile synthesis of these temporal and eternal realms, you must carefully harmonize both extremes to achieve true psychological equilibrium. Nietzsche further asserted that possessing a fundamental reason for existing enables a person to endure almost any method of survival, even when embracing such heavy personal responsibility feels crushing. Following your genuine internal compass guarantees that your actions remain purposeful, regardless of whether immediate outcomes appear favorable or disastrous to our highly restricted human perspective. The ancient Stoic philosophers constantly reminded their students that supposedly catastrophic events frequently yield positive results, prompting Seneca to observe, in Letters from a Stoic, that our anticipated agonies far outweigh our actual physical suffering. The celebrated Argentine author, Jorge Luis Borges, masterfully expanded upon these philosophical themes of choice and destiny by utilizing intricate, labyrinthine symbolism throughout his literature. In his intricate narrative, The Garden of Forking Paths, Borges conceptualizes a reality where every single decision you make eternally splinters into endless divergent trajectories. However, these infinite alternate timelines do not merely separate, they also run parallel and eventually intertwine, meaning the opportunities you previously bypassed will ultimately reconnect with your current reality. From this profound metaphysical viewpoint, time itself functions as an inescapable labyrinth, meaning humanity already inhabits a complex cosmic maze without needing to construct a physical one. To fully comprehend the enduring psychological resonance of these elaborate structures, you must examine their mythological genesis within ancient Greek lore. Seeking divine validation of his sovereign authority, King Minos of Crete petitioned the sea god Poseidon, who subsequently dispatched a breathtaking white bull from the coastal waters for ritual slaughter. Utterly captivated by the magnificent creature, the greedy monarch substituted a lesser animal for the offering, foolishly attempting to deceive the divine realm. Infuriated by this arrogant transgression, Poseidon inflicted a cruel retaliation by cursing Queen Pasiphae with an uncontrollable, maddening lust for the sacred beast. Driven to desperation by her unnatural craving, the queen commanded the legendary artisan Daedalus to fabricate a hollow wooden heifer so she could successfully consummate her desire. This horrifying union birthed a grotesque hybrid named Asterius, universally recognized as the Minotaur, which translates literally to the bull of Minos. Although classical antiquity typically rendered the monster with a human body and a bovine head, subsequent artistic interpretations occasionally reversed these proportions to resemble a savage centaur. As the unnatural offspring matured into a bloodthirsty predator that consumed human flesh, it stood as a horrifying, living monument to the king's hubristic defiance of the divine will. Functioning as a potent psychological manifestation of humanity's repressed, terrifying shadow, the disgraced ruler finally ordered Daedalus to engineer a colossal, inescapable labyrinth to conceal his shameful secret from the world. Upon completing his exceptionally complex design, Daedalus found himself barely capable of navigating back to the very entrance he had built. Such an elaborate trap perfectly suited the king's desires, providing a flawless method for eliminating adversaries while simultaneously concealing and nourishing the flesh-eating Minotaur. Tragedy struck when the ruler's eldest son perished under mysterious circumstances after journeying to Athens to compete in the Panathenaic Games, prompting the grieving father to hold the city entirely responsible. As a brutal form of compensation, he demanded a recurring blood tax from King Aegeus, forcing Athens to sacrifice 7 young men and 7 young women every 9 years. Selected purely by chance, these doomed individuals were transported to Crete aboard a vessel rigged with dark canvas, publicly displayed, and subsequently banished into the inescapable depths of the structure. As the grim deadline for the 3rd tribute loomed, the valiant Theseus bravely stepped forward, swapping places with a chosen victim to assassinate the monstrous beast. He embarked on the dread-inspiring dark-sailed ship, assuring his anxious father that he would hoist white canvas upon his return to signal a triumphant outcome. Upon his arrival in Crete, a deep infatuation consumed the king's daughter, Ariadne, prompting her to offer the warrior a vital tool suggested by Daedalus, a simple ball of yarn, historically known as a clue. By securing one end at the maze's threshold, he guaranteed his safe passage back through the bewildering corridors, a legendary tactic that ultimately birthed the modern English words clue and clueless to describe anything that guides you toward a solution or the lack thereof. From that moment forward, the concept of a guiding thread evolved into a powerful psychological symbol for finding your way out of deeply perplexing circumstances. Emerging from life's most disorienting mazes requires you to carefully trace the inner chord of your own spirit. Viewed through a Jungian lens, this supportive princess embodies the anima, the feminine aspect of the male psyche, offering essential guidance during the protagonist's catabasis, much like Beatrice leads the narrator through the afterlife in Dante's Divine Comedy. Following the successful slaughter of the creature, the victorious hero guides his fellow citizens back to the light, and together they immediately flee the Minoan shores. During their homeward voyage, the liberated captives stopped at surrounding islands to rejoice, enacting the intricate winding steps of the crane dance to mimic their harrowing journey through the twisted corridors. In a cruel twist of fate, the Athenian prince callously stranded his savior on the shores of Naxos, where the god Dionysus eventually claimed her as his bride. This romantic entanglement profoundly impacted philosophy, Just before descending into madness, Friedrich Nietzsche famously addressed Cosima Wagner in a letter, declaring his love for Ariadne and signing it as Dionysus. Meanwhile, the returning victor completely neglected to raise the triumphant white canvas, leading a devastated King Aegeus to witness the dark rigging and throw himself into the waters now bearing his name, an act of despair that inadvertently crowned his son. Rightfully suspecting the architect of divulging the maze's vulnerabilities, an enraged Minos locked both the creator and his son Icarus inside the very prison they had engineered. To secure their freedom, the brilliant inventor fashioned artificial wings, cautioning his boy against soaring too near the scorching sun, lest the delicate wax bindings dissolve. Disregarding this crucial advice, the reckless youth ascended too high, causing his equipment to fail and sending him crashing into the fatal embrace of the ocean below. While the literal existence of such a monstrous enclosure remains unproven, historians frequently link the myth's origins to the sprawling remains of Knossos, the heart of the Minoan civilization unearthed by Sir Arthur Evans during the 19th century. The incredibly convoluted architecture of this royal residence, featuring endless interconnected chambers, was a highly intentional characteristic rather than poor urban planning. Serving as the ultimate communal gathering spot, the central court likely hosted vital religious ceremonies for the populace. Simply traveling to this focal point demanded a ritualistic progression through the imposing estate, a physical traversal mimicking the spiritual renewal found at the core of any maze. Within these specific surroundings, an individual's psychological shifts were fundamentally triggered by the physical architecture, proving that the environment actively manipulated consciousness. Physical evidence supports these interpretations, as excavations yielded a painted plaster fragment depicting a twisting design originating between 1700 and 1600 BC. Furthermore, the pervasive presence of bovine imagery, particularly the ubiquitous horns of consecration, underscores the central role that perilous bull-leaping ceremonies played in their spiritual practices. Despite the murky etymological roots of the word labyrinthos, linguists connect it to the Mycenaean Greek vocabulary as da purito, a derivative of the even older Minoan term du pul re. This linguistic lineage ties directly to Mount Ida, historically revered as the divine peak of the goddess, and points toward the deeply venerated, naturally chaotic cave systems near Gortina. Many experts theorize that these complex underground networks initially birthed the architectural legends we recognize today. Exploring these specific subterranean realms, the French scientist J.P. de Tournefort detailed how a modest opening on a precipitous slope plunged him directly into a deeply confusing network of tunnels. Following in his footsteps, the architect C.R. Cockerell documented a profound mix of terror and awe regarding the location, noting that the seemingly deliberate, infinite branching of the stony corridors forced you to constantly choose between multiple diverging paths at nearly every turn. The classical tale of the Minotaur merely provides our initial glimpse into a much broader symbolic universe regarding these twisting structures. Because ancient stories inherently blend timeless psychological truths with specific historical details, the sheer weight of cultural baggage can sometimes hide the raw underlying archetypes from your view. The architectural concept is inextricably linked to the natural world, a connection extensively explored by Gaetano Cipolla in his influential text Labyrinth, Studies on an Archetype, where he argues that natural grottos and constructed mazes share identical spiritual DNA. Beyond functioning as rudimentary shelters for primitive communities, these rocky hollows operated as highly charged arenas for ceremonial magic and profound initiatory rites. Because they also functioned as tombs for previous generations, these subterranean voids became inextricably linked to concepts of the afterlife and the underworld. Stepping into these dark, chthonic spaces represented a deeply spiritual journey backward, allowing you to symbolically re-enter the primordial womb of Mother Earth from which all existence springs. According to the psychoanalyst Joseph Henderson, across various civilizations, the labyrinth serves as a confounding manifestation of matriarchal awareness, accessible solely to individuals prepared for a profound initiation into the enigmatic realm of the collective unconscious. This intricate structure is inextricably linked to the concept of birth. Early variations of these winding paths, such as meanders and spirals, have been discovered within prehistoric cave art, frequently etched alongside animal carvings or ancient deity figurines. Ultimately, these twisting corridors represent a metaphorical gateway, bridging our tangible mortal world with the unseen sacred plane, echoing the pathway departed spirits supposedly traveled to re-enter the maternal womb, preceding their eventual reincarnation. It is far from coincidental that traditional Indian practices historically employed the labyrinth, or yantra, as a mystical tool intended to alleviate the agonies associated with childbirth, while Hopi Native American culture similarly interprets this motif as an emblem of the Great Mother, incarnation, and delivery. Furthermore, the Hungarian academic Carl Jung suggests in his work Labyrinth Studies that this word initially described a choreographed ritual whose trajectory strictly followed the ancient winding design, establishing a direct connection to the ancient crane dance. Because physical gesturing remains the most fundamental mode of expression, such ceremonies evoke the image of Nataraja, the representation of Shiva, as the supreme cosmic dancer, orchestrating the eternal rhythms of the universe's creation, maintenance, and ultimate dissolution. Beyond its spiritual implications, the labyrinth functions as one of humanity's most ancient apotropaic emblems, evidenced by countless Roman mosaics that portray these structures as fortified citadels positioned near domestic entryways to deflect malicious forces. This protective tradition stems from the belief that malevolent entities are condemned to travel exclusively in linear trajectories, rendering them completely incapable of navigating an environment defined by endless meanders and blind corners. Within Indian traditions, this defensive mysticism is exemplified by the chakra vyuha, a formation perfectly mirroring the initiatory rituals so prevalent within clandestine organizations. Such ceremonies deliberately utilize these disorienting spaces to temporarily shatter an initiate's logical framework, thereby permitting primal instincts and profound, numinous forces to illuminate the authentic route to enlightenment. The internal architecture of this maze maximizes spatial distortion through relentless directional shifts, deliberately inflicting psychological distress as you repeatedly approach the center, only to be redirected away from it. Because the designated route offers zero alternative pathways, any individual capable of enduring this profound emotional friction will invariably secure their destination, often achieving a monumental breakthrough at the precise moment they consider surrendering. Consequently, navigating this space guarantees not a loss of identity, but rather the ultimate discovery of one's true nature through a metaphorical death and subsequent resurrection into a transformed state of being. This relentless metamorphosis is physically woven into the path's sinuous layout, alternating endlessly between leftward turns, symbolizing the sun's inverse trajectory toward mortality or the unconscious, and rightward movements, denoting the solar progression toward vitality and waking awareness. From a psychological perspective, navigating this complex architecture symbolizes a harrowing descent into the infernal depths. As the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung observed, this primordial motif frequently surfaces within human psychology as a subconscious fantasy detailing a plunge into the underworld, though this mental landscape typically manifests through the treacherous misdirections of a subterranean odyssey rather than a literal maze. Such conceptualizations deeply echo ancient Egyptian mortuary beliefs, particularly the Book of Gates, which requires the departed spirit to traverse a labyrinthine gauntlet fraught with terrifying entities and monumental obstacles. While the Book of the Dead offered navigational spells for that specific journey, Dante's interpretation of hell presents an equally structured nightmare, organizing eternal damnation into 9 concentric circles that escalate in agony the deeper one plunges towards Satan at the absolute center. Before stepping through the infernal gates, bearing the chilling inscription demanding the abandonment of all hope, Dante famously declared that he awoke midway through the journey of our life, stranded within a shadowy forest after straying from the righteous path. By explicitly framing this as a collective experience, the poet underscores that venturing into the abyss to retrieve hidden wisdom represents an archetypal ordeal uniting all of humanity. Carl Jung chronicled his own profound psychological descent within the pages of the Red Book, illustrating that while we might appear physically isolated during such trials, our internal landscape teems with companion entities. As the mythologist Joseph Campbell articulated, anyone who dares to navigate the winding spiritual corridors of their own internal darkness, whether by choice or by accident, will inevitably discover a vibrant ecosystem inhabited by symbolic figures. It remains a profound paradox that true self-discovery requires you to first lose your way, as utter disorientation forces most of us to finally seek salvation from within. Ultimately, your unconscious mind possesses a far deeper comprehension of your identity than your waking ego, serving as the supreme reservoir of insight and the foundational blueprint of your existence. Carl Jung eloquently affirmed this necessity by stating that external circumstances remain entirely meaningless and hollow when they are divorced from profound internal revelation, which is precisely why he measured the uniqueness of his own reality solely through the lens of inner psychological events rather than superficial outward occurrences. Whenever we lose our internal compass and sever this connection to our inner guidance, the external world inevitably morphs into an insurmountable, colossal maze. Escaping that profound inner entanglement, what early alchemists termed the massa confusa, requires you to navigate toward your own center, which stands as the ultimate emblem of absolute integration. Naturally, the route you must take is rarely a direct line, twisting instead like a serpent. Carl Jung noted that ancient alchemical traditions demanded the complete dedication of the individual, relentlessly pursuing the homo totus, or the whole person. Unfortunately, your authentic journey toward integration will inevitably involve fateful deviations, disastrous missteps, and unavoidable wrong turns. You find yourself walking the longissima via, the longest path, which coils forward, binding opposing forces together much like the intertwined serpents of a guiding caduceus. Throughout these labyrinthine loops, you will inevitably encounter genuine terrors alongside experiences frequently labeled as entirely inaccessible. In truth, these profound encounters remain out of reach only because they demand an immense toll of personal exertion. They require you to embrace the exact completeness you might eagerly discuss in endless theories, yet actively dodge when confronted with real-life circumstances. Even as you express a deep longing for profound unity, you might simultaneously resort to the most irrational lengths just to evade confronting your own soul. You constantly chase illumination, only to frequently stumble headlong into the shadows. While you tend to romanticize absolute perfection, actual existence demands genuine completeness. As Jung observed, achieving this state necessitates bearing a psychological thorn in the flesh, enduring the acute pain of your own flaws, because without that specific suffering, neither forward progress nor upward ascent can ever occur. Consider the alchemical manuscript published in 1672 entitled The Green Lion, or The Light of the Philosophers, where a convoluted maze serves as a protective shrine housing the coveted Philosopher's Stone. Above this sanctuary, vital cosmic elements hover, prominently featuring the sun and moon flanked by classical planetary realms, alongside the fundamental symbols representing body, spirit, and soul: salt, mercury, and sulfur. These celestial bodies simultaneously denote base metals, perfectly illustrating the intricate microcosm-macrocosm mirror reflecting cosmic events onto earthly planes. Guarding the entrance stands an angelic figure holding the fabled thread of Ariadne, valiantly attempting to guide seekers deep into the winding corridors. Within this context, the complex maze serves to illustrate the monumental hurdles inherent in the great work of internal transmutation. Historical practitioners firmly maintained that realizing this miraculous transformation was entirely dependent upon divine permission, occurring strictly Deo concedente. Reaching the core has perpetually represented stepping into a highly venerated domain. By crossing this threshold into an extraordinary realm, you gain unprecedented revelations regarding your own identity, your fellow human beings, and the broader universe. You transition seamlessly from the mundane sphere into the holy, a shift beautifully articulated by Mircea Eliade. At this innermost point, you unearth the exceptionally elusive prize, historically characterized as the Philosopher's Stone, the restorative elixir of life, or the indestructible diamond body. All these legendary treasures merely represent what Jung defined as the self, encompassing the divine imprint and the fully realized personality. Countless mystics have correctly observed that intimately knowing your own nature equates to understanding the divine. This central hub radiates a profoundly numinous energy, embodying what Rudolf Otto termed the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, an awe-inspiring paradox that simultaneously strikes you with profound terror and magnetic captivation. You might mistakenly assume that successfully arriving at the core constitutes the final destination of your psychological development. In reality, piercing the center merely marks the halfway point of your overarching expedition. Ultimately, you must navigate your way out of the winding corridors, stepping back into the mundane realm as a fundamentally altered individual, equipped with entirely fresh perspectives. This cyclical process represents a profound spiritual death, followed by an immediate resurrection. As T.S. Eliot elegantly phrased it, the ultimate conclusion of all human exploration simply involves returning to your initial starting point and truly comprehending that familiar location for the very first time. Naturally, this endeavor demands a lifelong dedication to a continuously repeating cycle. Your personal journey toward individuation closely resembles a spiraling maze, demanding continuous circumambulation as you traverse through an array of concentric rings revolving around a singular focal point. Within the ancient text of the Emerald Tablet, Hermes Trismegistus perfectly captures this dynamic, asserting the absolute truth that the inferior realm perfectly mirrors the superior domain. His profound doctrine explains how energy ascends toward the heavens before raining back down to the soil, gathering supreme power from both realms to banish all surrounding darkness and bestow universal glory upon you. Plunging into the depths of the winding paths symbolizes your dramatic transition from the terrestrial plane to the celestial heights, while your subsequent exit effectively drags that heavenly essence back into everyday reality. Utilizing this fundamental law of correspondence allows you to elevate mundane matter into spiritual grace, and then ground that ethereal insight into physical existence, thereby saturating your daily routine with sacred meaning. A parallel concept anchors the classic hero's journey, demanding that you cross into magical realms only to carry a restorative boon back to your original community. Whether manifested as profound wisdom, boundless love, or simply the hard-earned proof of your survival, this acquired elixir exists solely for you to heal and elevate those around you. In a similar philosophical vein, Kierkegaard's Knight of Faith refuses to abandon worldly existence, instead throwing himself back into daily life through a masterful double movement. By springing from the finite into the infinite and immediately landing back in mundane reality, this archetypal figure manages to infuse every single earthly stride with boundless, eternal faith. During the Middle Ages, these intricate networks similarly served as potent metaphors for your ultimate spiritual redemption and the grueling trek toward the divine. Elaborate floor designs became permanent fixtures in countless churches and cathedrals, later experiencing a massive resurgence in popularity when the Gothic revival swept across the architectural landscape. Arguably the most celebrated historical example remains enshrined within the stone floors of Chartres Cathedral in France, historically utilized as a localized alternative for undertaking a hazardous physical pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Within those hallowed walls, the meandering design transforms into a highly personalized spiritual expedition, where every sharp turn represents another monumental hurdle you must clear to achieve final salvation. Countless individuals who physically trace these lines report profound shifts in their perception of time and spatial dimensions. The winding pathway effectively morphs into an intensely liminal zone, completely erasing the rigid barriers separating your internal psychology from your external reality, revealing them as merely two inseparable facets of the unus mundus, or the unified one world. Historically, this internal voyage is frequently portrayed through the archetype of a wayfarer undertaking a sacred expedition. Within the pages of the highly significant 17th-century religious text, Pia Desideria, or Pious Desires, author Hermann Hugo illustrates a traveler positioned squarely in the middle of a maze. This wanderer searches for a distant egress leading toward a heavenly fortress, while a celestial being above uses Ariadne's thread, representing the divine word, to provide direction. A fascinating aspect of this particular illustration is that the maze's partitions actually serve as the walkway the traveler is required to navigate. Consequently, the true peril rests in the risk of tumbling from these heights, a fate clearly befalling two individuals in the artwork, while a sightless man, relying on his canine companion, succeeds by placing faith in his intuition. Furthermore, a beacon atop the celestial fortress directs maritime vessels, while a pair of nomads strive to scale the divine peak, with one tragically plummeting back down. Beneath this intricate illustration sits a poignant inscription, expressing a deep yearning for divine guidance to uphold holy laws. Shifting to Matteo Salvaggi's woodcut from 1542, titled Labyrinth of Earthly Love, we observe Pluto, the ruler of the underworld, emerging from the fiery depths of Mount Etna. Surrounding him are banners directing viewers to the initial gateway of the maze, while other scrolls display warnings about burning lust and selfish devotion, ultimately leading to a central message urging humanity upward unto the face of God. By contrast, the labyrinth of divine love shifts the focus entirely from infernal realms to celestial ones, highlighting profound adoration and absolute immersion in the divine. Similarly exploring these themes, the Czech author John Amos Comenius presented a profound allegory in his 1623 publication Labyrinth of the World and Paradise of the Heart. He outlines the expedition of a central figure known simply as the Pilgrim, who navigates a sprawling metropolis that serves as a physical manifestation of a chaotic and morally bankrupt society. Escorted by figures named Mr. Ubiquitous and Mr. Delusion, who embody insatiable inquisitiveness and profound trickery, this traveler observes populations entirely devoured by avarice, ego, and ethical decay. Watching his fellow humans ruthlessly chase influence and societal standing at the expense of their personal honor leaves the wanderer feeling profoundly disheartened. However, a divine manifestation of Christ ultimately presents itself to the traveler, empowering him to become a luminous guide for his fellow men. Through this revelation, the protagonist learns that genuine tranquility exists strictly internally within the paradise of the heart. Thus, even if external reality remains a bewildering maze, one's inner spirit can transform into a sanctuary when harmonized with God. Following a parallel thematic trajectory, John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress, released in 1678, chronicles the life of Christian, a wanderer heavily oppressed by the symbolic weight of his transgressions, who abandons his entire former life to pursue ultimate redemption. Pointed toward a restrictive entryway, he finds himself chased by two individuals, obstinate and pliable, who aim to drag him back. Yet, he staunchly rejects any return to the city of destruction. While Obstinate departs after dismissing the traveler as insane, Pliable decides to tag along, lured by the promise of riches within the celestial city. Unfortunately, their expedition hits a snag when they plummet into the Slough of Despond, a profound quagmire where the protagonist sinks dangerously deep due to his massive metaphysical load. After managing to extricate himself from the muck, Pliable promptly deserts his companion, only to face intense mockery back home for surrendering at the very first sign of hardship. Meanwhile, a figure appropriately named Help saves our struggling protagonist, allowing him to press forward on his arduous trek. Interestingly, the narrative relieves the wanderer of his crushing burdens quite early in the story, freeing him to advance toward eternal bliss. Nevertheless, he must still confront a daunting series of trials along the way, including the steep incline of the hill Difficulty, the humbling depths of the Valley of Humiliation, the terrifying expanse of the Valley of the Shadow of Death, and finally, the perilous waters of the River of Death. Ultimately, the maze serves as a universal symbol, capturing a vast array of concepts, ranging from the fundamental course of human existence and maternal earthly origins, to rituals of initiation, liminality, transformative descent into the underworld, and eventual rebirth. This intricate pattern also mirrors the alchemical great work and the deeply personal quest to discover one's authentic self. Once you recognize that the bewildering detours and complex routing of your personal experience belong to a much grander design, uncovering genuine purpose becomes entirely possible. Furthermore, acknowledging that true joy must be cultivated internally ensures that this profound contentment will eventually radiate outward into your external reality. Fulfilling your inherent responsibilities guarantees a sense of satisfaction, whereas neglecting them inevitably breeds profound despair. Although the pursuit of ultimate truth often feels like a highly secluded expedition, Carl Jung once shared a poignant observation from an ancient alchemical scholar regarding this very isolation. He noted that regardless of how detached or solitary you might feel, diligently and authentically dedicating yourself to your personal work will inevitably draw unrecognized kindred spirits to your side. By awakening to the fundamental core of your own soul, you instantly forge an unbreakable bond with the natural world, the broader cosmos, and all other conscious entities. In essence, you align yourself with God, the divine force that ultimately smooths out the most convoluted and treacherous walkways of life.